ABA was a city that never slept, but not because of its beauty or its dreams. It stayed awake because of struggle. From dawn till dusk, generators hummed loudly like restless bees. Market women shouted prices in hoarse voices. Muddy water snaked through the busy roads, and the air was always thick, with heat, with noise, with life. People survived here. They didn't live. In the middle of this restless city, in a cramped compound where 6 families shared a single bathroom and a cracked well, Olido was born. Her mother, Mama Nina, always said she came into the world quietly. No loud cry, no struggle. She simply opened her eyes and stared at the midwife as if she already understood that life would be hard. Her father, Okachukwu, was a mechanic at Cemetery Road, the kind who fixed cars with more strength and prayer than tools, because tools were just too expensive. Every day, he returned home with grease-stained hands and tired bones, yet he always managed to find a smile for his children. Olido grew up with 4 siblings, all under one leaking roof. When the rain fell, they placed buckets under the holes to catch the water. When the harmattan season came, the cold bit right through the thin walls. They slept on worn mats, pushing close together for warmth. But the real enemy wasn't the weather, it was poverty. She attended a public school nearby, a building so old that some windows had no frames, just the memory of broken glass. Teachers came when they could. A piece of chalk was precious. Exercise books were reused until the pages became as thin as onion skin. Olido loved learning, especially English and literature. She dreamed of becoming a journalist, someone who told stories that mattered. But dreams in places like ABA often died young. Sometimes, she was sent home for owing school fees. On those days, she didn't cry. She would simply walk to the market to help her mother sell audrey and pepper. Other times, her uniform was so torn that she had to stitch it at night, using a fishing line her father brought from a neighbor. But what truly marked her childhood was hunger. This wasn't the kind of hunger you feel when you skip lunch or the hunger of waiting a little too long for dinner. This was the kind of hunger that made her dizzy in class, the kind that forced her to drink water just to fool her stomach into believing it had eaten. Yet, despite all of this, Olido remained beautiful, painfully beautiful. Her almond-shaped eyes, her rich brown skin, and her long legs turned heads even when she was just a teenager. People would often say, "This girl is too fine for suffering." But beauty didn't feed a family. By the time she reached SS1, her first year of senior secondary school, she had become more than just a student. She became a second mother to her younger siblings. She cooked, fetched water, and washed clothes in the compound's corner, humming quietly to herself. Her hands were always busy, growing rough from chores that were far too heavy for a young girl. Her father's mechanic shop often struggled for customers. Her mother's market stall barely made enough for food. Electricity was a luxury they couldn't afford, so they studied by candlelight, their shadows dancing on the peeling walls of their small room. Her siblings adored her, especially little Afani, who believed she could fix anything, from broken slippers to broken hearts. But Olido carried a sadness she never voiced, a quiet fear that life would never get better. When she entered SS3, her final year, people started asking, "What's next? Will you go to university?" She would always smile politely, but inside, her heart twisted. There was no money, no sponsor, no miracle coming to save her. She wrote her WAC exam using a borrowed calculator and a pen she guarded like a treasure. And she passed, with good grades. But the celebration was short-lived. On the day she received her results, her father sat quietly on a wooden stool outside their home. His face was drawn, his eyes tired. He couldn't look at her directly. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice cracking. "But, Ada M., my daughter, we don't have anything. University? I don't know how we will manage." She nodded slowly and hugged him. She didn't cry. She had already cried enough in her heart. A week after finishing school, she sat alone behind their house, watching kids chase a deflated football. Life around her moved on, noisy and chaotic, but she felt strangely still. For the first time, she saw her life with a painful clarity, a brilliant mind trapped in poverty, a beautiful girl in a world that valued beauty only when it could be used, a daughter who had become a mother far too soon. She realized she had nothing, no money, no future, no hope. And that was the moment something dark and silent entered her heart. It wasn't evil. It wasn't wickedness. It was just desperation. A quiet desperation that whispered, "If you don't save yourself, no one will." That whisper would eventually lead her down a path she never imagined. A path where men would break her spirit while pretending to adore her beauty. A path where she would lose herself piece by piece, touch by touch. But that was a story for another chapter. For now, in the heart of ABA, under the constant hum of generators and the smoke of frying akara, A girl named Olido sat quietly, unaware that the choices she was about to make would shape a destiny the world was not ready for. A destiny that would one day bring forth a child unlike any ever born. The weeks after Olido finished secondary school drifted by slowly, like harmattan smoke that refused to clear. Each day felt the same heat, the same gnawing hunger, the same suffocating uncertainty. She spent her days at her mother's market stall, washing bitter leaf until her fingers were stained green, arranging pyramids of tomatoes, and shouting prices until her voice cracked. But no matter how hard she and her mother worked, the money they made never seemed to stretch far enough. It didn't matter how early they woke up or how late they stayed. Poverty always won. The portions of food on their plates grew smaller. Their hopes became smaller. Olido felt her dreams, once so bright and vivid, shrinking into dust. Day by day, the weight of their situation pressed down, heavier and heavier. One afternoon, as she sat at the back of the market, her fingers numbly tying peppers into small nylon bags, two girls walked by. She recognized them. They were from her neighborhood, near Asa Road, always seen getting into flashy cars. People whispered about them, calling them Run's girls. Girls who lived on their beauty, not a salary. They wore matching red wigs, tight jeans, and perfumes so strong the scent lingered long after they were gone. They stopped near a provision stall, their whispers loud enough for Olido to hear. "Girl, last night was Maddo. One politician took me to a hotel in Maitama." The other girl gasped, "Chai, how much did he give you?" "250K. They erupted in loud, proud laughter. "See money." Olido heard every word. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. It wasn't envy. It wasn't even jealousy. It was a cold, quiet realization that hit her like a physical blow. For people like them, for people like her, beauty was the only door out of this life. She tried to push the thought away, to bury it deep, but it lingered, a dangerous seed planted in her mind. The true turning point came on a night her father, a mechanic, returned home with nothing. Not a single kobo. He sat on the doorstep, his head bowed, his large hands trembling from a day of fruitless labor. Inside, her younger siblings were crying from hunger. Their mother was boiling water on the stove, pretending she was cooking just so the children might fall asleep with a little bit of hope. Olido stood in the corner of the room, watching this scene unfold. The pain she felt was so deep, so sharp, it felt like it was in her bones. She knew then that poverty had already taken everything from them. And when a person has nothing left to lose, they start to consider paths they once feared, paths they swore they would never walk. The first step into darkness happened quietly, without any drama. One evening, she put on her only decent dress, a simple red one she saved for church, and walked to a nearby bar, one known to be popular with businessmen. She didn't have a plan. She didn't know what she would do or how she would even start, but she knew exactly why she was there. She sat alone at the counter, her hands shaking so much she had to clench them in her lap. Men looked at her, some with admiration, some with a cold assessment in their eyes, and some saw her exactly for what she was, an opportunity. A middle-aged man with a shiny gold wristwatch approached her. "You're too fine to be sitting all alone," he said, a practiced smile on his face. She managed a small smile back, her heart pounding against her ribs. They talked. He bought her a drink. He asked questions, and she answered with lies she created on the spot, weaving a new identity for herself out of thin air. Later, he leaned in and said the 10 words that would seal her fate. "Let us go somewhere private. I'll take care of you." She hesitated for just a moment. A tiny, fleeting moment where the old Olido almost stood up and ran home, back to the familiar misery. But then, she saw the image of her siblings' empty plates, heard their hungry cries in her mind. She followed him. When she returned home late that night, she had $35 in her purse. It was more money than her father had made in weeks. Her mother, her eyes wide with a mix of suspicion and hope, asked where she got it. The lie came easily. "I helped a rich woman with some house chores." Her mother's tired face broke into a smile of pure relief, and she thanked God. That night, Olido cried silently into her pillow. She wasn't crying from shame or even guilt. She cried because it worked. The money was like a miracle. It solved their problems instantly. There was food on the table again. The children's school fees were paid. The light, which had been cut off for months, came back on, filling their small house with a brightness that felt almost foreign. But the snowball had already started rolling downhill, and it was gaining speed. The next week, she went back to the bar, and the week after that, and the one after that. Soon, the men started to learn her name. Soon, they were calling her phone directly. Soon, she no longer had to sit alone at the counter, waiting for someone to notice her. She had become the center of attention. At first, she hated herself for what she was doing. Every touch felt like a brand, every fake smile a betrayal of the girl she used to be. But with time, the sharp edges of her self-loathing began to dull. The hate turned into numbness, a disconnected state where she was just an actor playing a part. And eventually, the numbness gave way to something else: confidence. A hard, polished confidence that was both her armor and her weapon. Men adored her beauty, her curves, her voice, her charm. And she learned how to use every part of herself like a tool for survival. She became a master of her trade, knowing just what to say, how to act, how to make each man feel like he was the only one in the world. She was no longer just a girl from the market. She was a creation, a fantasy that men were willing to pay for. Years passed. Her savings account grew larger than she had ever imagined possible. Her name and face became well known in the city's hidden circles. Her beauty, once raw and natural, was now sharpened and refined, maintained with expensive creams and clothes. But as her outer world transformed, something dark was growing inside her, something she never saw coming. What had begun as a desperate act to save her family had morphed into something else entirely. It became a cycle she couldn't break. At first, she told herself she needed the money. Then, she started to crave the attention, the feeling of being the most desirable woman in any room. And then, worst of all, she became addicted to the feeling itself. The feeling of being wanted, of being desired, of being valued, even if that value was measured in currency. She had escaped the prison of poverty only to find herself trapped in a gilded cage of her own making. The girl who once washed bitter leaf at the market was gone, replaced by a woman who had mastered the art of survival, but had lost herself somewhere along the way. She could no longer tell where Olido ended and the character she played began. The road she had taken to save her family had led her to a place where she was more lost than ever before. By now, 3 out of every 5 men in ABA either knew her name or had been with her. It was a whispered statistic, a legend that floated around like market gossip. And she felt trapped, not by poverty anymore, but by the person she had become. Sometimes at night, after the noise of the city quieted, she'd sit alone and whisper to herself, "Is this my life forever?" She knew she needed to escape. She knew she needed a new beginning. She knew she longed for something real: love, family, peace. But she didn't know how to climb out of the ditch she had fallen into. Not yet. But destiny was already moving, preparing a way, shaping a future she could not even imagine. A future that would one day bring her to a city where nobody knew her past, to a man who would love her beyond reason, and to a child who would change her world forever. The first year slipped by quietly, like a shadow moving under a dim light. In the beginning, Olido tried to keep everything under control. She tried to limit how often she went out, to choose her clients carefully, to keep her dignity intact. But life in ABA had a way of pulling even the strongest people into its rhythm. And it wasn't long before that rhythm pulled her in too. It all started with small changes. She started dressing differently: brighter clothes, tighter jeans, shoes she could never have afforded before. She began speaking with more confidence, her voice gradually losing the timid softness it once carried. And people noticed. The women in her compound would whisper whenever she passed. The men would stare longer than they should. Even her own siblings admired her, completely unaware of the true price of her newfound beauty. Inside her, something was shifting. Slowly at first, then rapidly. At some point, she realized she no longer walked, she glided. She no longer hoped, she calculated. She no longer feared men, she commanded them. The girl who once cried silently on her thin mattress was disappearing. In her place, a new woman was rising, bold, sharp, and intoxicating. Her evenings were no longer spent fetching water or helping her mother cook. Instead, she found herself in loud clubs, dim hotels, private apartments, and bars where the lighting was always too dark and the perfume always too strong. Men treated her differently now, with a hunger, with admiration, with a kind of desperation. They bought her gifts, they begged for her attention. They returned again and again as if she were their only escape from the world. And slowly, subtly, she began to enjoy it. The attention, the praise, the power. At first, she told herself she didn't enjoy it. She told herself she was doing it for her family, just for survival. But survival had long since ended. Now, she did it because it filled the emptiness inside her. Within just 2 years, Olido became one of the most recognized young women in the city. Not publicly, of course, but in whispers, in phone contacts, in late-night conversations between men. Her name traveled through lounges, hotels, and offices. She could buy whatever she wanted. She could send money home whenever she chose. Her siblings' school fees were always paid on time. Her parents began to smile more often, blissfully unaware of the sacrifices behind each full plate of food on their table. But money was no longer what drove her. She realized this one night when a man, one of her richest clients, placed a thick envelope of naira on the table, enough money to buy a plot of land. Before, she would have been thrilled. But that night, she barely even looked at it. Her mind was on something else entirely. She wanted to be touched. She wanted to feel wanted. She wanted to disappear into pure sensation, into an escape, into the only thing that made her forget her past and silence the relentless thoughts in her head. The addiction had taken root. Not to money, not to luxury, but to the act itself. It wasn't long before her fame became too loud to ignore. Men talked, men bragged, and men lied. Stories spread like wildfire, some true, some false, some exaggerated beyond all reason. Her name became a secret password men used among themselves. She's good. She's better than good. She's unforgettable. Some men even traveled from other towns just to find her. At first, all this attention made her feel powerful. But later, it just made her feel trapped. She couldn't walk freely in certain areas of the city anymore. She couldn't sit in a bar without someone recognizing her. She couldn't pretend to be an ordinary girl. The city had given her money, but it had taken her anonymity. ABA knew her all too well. There were nights she cried after everything was over. Nights she stared at the ceiling, feeling exhausted and hollow, wondering what she had become. But by morning, the cycle would begin all over again. She tried to stop once. For 2 weeks. She stayed home, avoided calls, and refused all invitations. By the end of the second week, she couldn't sleep. Her body felt restless. Her mind was loud and chaotic. Her skin felt like it was burning from the inside out. She thought she was losing her mind. She needed the touch, the escape, the feeling of being wanted, even if it was just for a moment. The addiction of the body had fully claimed her. The need for physical connection had become a hunger that overshadowed everything else. It wasn't about love or intimacy. It was about sensation, about a fleeting moment of oblivion that silenced the ghosts of her past and the anxieties of her future. Each encounter was a temporary fix, a brief pause in the relentless noise inside her head. But with every fix, the void grew wider and the need grew stronger. She was caught in a spiral, chasing a feeling that could never truly fill the emptiness, only mask it for a little while longer. The more she indulged, the more she lost of the girl she once was, and the deeper she sank into the woman she never intended to be. The girl who left her village was gone. In her place was a woman who knew the language of men's desires but had forgotten the sound of her own heart. She was a queen in a kingdom of shadows, ruling over nights of fleeting passion, but she was a prisoner in the daylight. And the scariest part? She didn't know if she even wanted to be free anymore. The cage had become comfortable. The poison had become her medicine. And the escape she once craved from her poverty had now become an escape from herself. The question was no longer how to survive, but how to feel alive. And for now, this was the only way she knew. Without even thinking, she reached for her phone and accepted the next invitation. The moment she stepped back into that world, a strange calm washed over her. Her body relaxed, her mind settled, and her racing heartbeat returned to normal. It was in that instant she understood. She wasn't just doing this. She needed it. It was a craving that defied logic, morality, or shame. It ran deeper than flesh and bone. It touched the wounded part of her soul, the part she had no idea how to heal. One night, after a long evening, she found herself standing in front of a mirror in a stark hotel bathroom. The fluorescent light above flickered, casting harsh shadows on her face. She stared at her reflection, desperately searching for the girl she used to be, but she was nowhere to be found. The woman staring back had different eyes, sharper, darker, carrying stories no one could ever fully comprehend. Her body, though beautiful and desired by many, was tired. It was a weariness that sleep could never cure. For the first time in years, she spoke her own name aloud. Olito, what have you become? The silence that answered was heavy, suffocating. A deep yearning for a different life, a real life, rose within her. But she didn't know how to start over. Every path she imagined was stained by the choices she'd already made. Yet, from somewhere deep inside, a small, persistent voice whispered, "You can still change. You can still escape." She didn't know how. She didn't know when. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she couldn't live like this forever. What she didn't realize then was that destiny was already quietly opening a door for her, a door that would lead her far from ABA, far from her past, and into the arms of a man who would change everything, for better and for worse. Time has a strange way of sneaking up on you. For years, Olito lived in a whirlwind. Nights blurred into one another. Days passed like fleeting shadows, and her phone was a constant buzz of calls from men who wanted her company. She was always moving, always earning, always performing. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something else was happening. She was aging. It wasn't a harsh, sudden change. Her beauty was still sharp enough to turn heads, but she felt the subtle shifts. The mornings when her body felt heavier. The nights when her mind felt emptier. The strange, hollow feeling that lingered after every encounter. She was approaching 30, but the life she'd lived had made her soul feel ancient. The first sign came from a casual comment. A younger girl in the neighborhood asked playfully, "Auntie Olito, please let me borrow your face powder. But yours is even finer. If I reach your age and still look as good as you, I'll thank God." Oh. Olito froze. Your age. It was the first time anyone had pointed out that she wasn't 21 anymore. She was a grown woman who had spent nearly a decade trapped in a cycle she never intended to join. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of the city. She gently touched her face. Her cheekbones were still high, her skin still smooth, but something felt different. Something she couldn't quite name. Was it fear? Regret? Or just the crushing weight of a life lived in the shadows? Then came a night she couldn't forget. Her client was a young man, barely 22. He was excited, nervous, and giggled too much. When he realized who she was, his eyes widened. So you're the famous Olito? I heard you've been in this game since before I even got into university." He laughed, thinking it was a harmless joke. But for Olito, his words felt like a knife twisting in her chest. She managed a polite smile, but inside, something cracked. Later that night, back in her room, she locked the door and collapsed onto her bed. Since before he entered university, she whispered to herself, over and over. Each repetition felt heavier than the last, a confirmation of the time she had lost. Once she started noticing her age, she couldn't unsee it. She began avoiding mirrors. She stopped wearing certain clothes, afraid they made her look desperate to hold on to her youth. Her smile became a rare sight, because somehow, it made her feel older. And worst of all, the men started treating her differently. Some were still captivated by her, but many of the new ones were younger, fresh, playful, and careless. They saw her as an experienced woman, a veteran, not the innocent beauty she once was. The compliments changed too. They became backhanded and tinged with pity. "You're still very fine for your age. Auntie, you still get bodio. I can't believe you're already in your late 20s. Still, that one word, still, felt like a slap every time she heard it. Still beautiful, still desirable, still relevant. As if beauty had an expiration date. As if desire had a timeline. As if she was a product on a shelf, about to expire. She was running out of time. The mask she had worn for so long was slowly, painfully, starting to crumble, revealing the terrified woman underneath. What happens when the one thing you've built your entire life on begins to fade? For Olito, this was just the beginning of her search for an answer. One night, after seeing a client, she returned to her small apartment. The money was good. The night was what you might call successful. And yet, she felt an overwhelming emptiness wrapping itself around her like cold harmattan air. She walked in and just dropped the money on the table, not even bothering to count it. She took off her shoes slowly, as if each simple movement carried a heavy memory she didn't want to revisit. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. Dozens of missed calls littered the screen. Men asking when she was free. Men asking for pictures. Men asking for just one more night. In a moment of pure frustration, she threw the phone onto the bed. And for the first time in years, she cried loudly. This wasn't the silent, controlled sobbing she had mastered. This was a painful, raw cry that escaped from the deepest part of her soul. She cried for the girl she used to be, the one with dreams that had nothing to do with this life. She cried for the woman she had become, a stranger in her own skin. And she cried for a future she feared she would never have, a future that seemed to be slipping further away with every passing night. What scared her most wasn't the thought of aging. It was the crushing realization that she had no life beyond men and money. No husband, no children, no home to truly call her own. No identity outside the hazy glow of the nightlife. There was just an empty apartment and a body that no longer felt like it belonged to her. The next morning, she stood in front of the mirror and really looked at herself, maybe for the first time in a long, long time. She saw the truth reflected back at her. She saw the beauty that still remained, but she also saw the scars no one else could see, the invisible wounds of a life lived on the edge. She saw a woman who had survived things most people only whisper about in hushed tones. But beneath all that, she saw something else, loneliness, a deep, aching pain, regret that hung heavy in her eyes, and a desperate yearning for something real. She pictured wedding rings, not just expensive jewelry. She imagined the sound of children's laughter filling a home, not the silence of her empty room. She craved a husband's touch filled with genuine love, not just lust. She swallowed hard, pressing a hand against her chest as if to hold herself together. "I want a family," she whispered to her reflection. "I want a different life." The realization was terrifying, because wanting a new life meant walking away from the only world she knew, the only life that had provided for her, however broken it was. But she wasn't completely without resources. She had saved money, tucked away for a day she never knew would come. She had a strength forged in fire, a resilience that had kept her going. And she had courage buried deep under the mistakes of her past. For the first time in years, she felt something she thought she had lost forever: hope. A new dream began to form in her mind. It was shaky, fragile, but it was real. A dream of escape, of reinvention, of finding a love that was pure. A dream of starting over in a place where her past couldn't follow her, a place where she could just be her. And so, silently, without telling a single soul, she made a decision. A decision that would uproot her entire life, carry her to a new city, and set in motion a destiny far beyond anything she could have imagined. A decision that would eventually lead her to a man named Chuka, to a marriage she never expected, and to the birth of a child who would change everything. The decision to leave ABA didn't land softly. It struck Olito like a storm, sudden, overwhelming, and absolutely impossible to ignore. After that night, she cried herself to sleep. Something awakened inside her. A quiet strength. A stubborn, unshakable determination. A whisper followed her everywhere she went. A constant echo in her mind. Start again. Leave this place before it buries you. For days, she moved like a woman possessed by a vision. She couldn't explain it, not even to herself. She just knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that her time in ABA had expired. The city that had once been her world now felt like a cage. The final straw came one evening. She walked into a hotel lobby where she normally met clients. The receptionist, a woman she'd seen 100 times, looked at her differently. It wasn't with the usual mix of admiration or lust she was used to. It was recognition, yes, but it was laced with something else. Pity. That single look, that flash of pity in the receptionist's eyes, was the moment she knew she had stayed too long. Later that night, after the man she was with had fallen asleep, she slipped out of the hotel room quietly. But instead of going straight home, she found herself wandering through the quiet streets of ABA. She listened to the familiar hum of generators and the distant, muffled voices drifting from beer parlors. She passed the broken streetlights, the familiar corner kiosks, the old shops that had once felt like the backdrop of her home. But now, everything looked different. It all seemed smaller, narrower, too tight to contain the woman she was desperate to become. She stopped in front of a dark store window and saw her reflection in the glass. A beautiful woman, wrapped in the dim light of the night, her eyes carrying secrets she didn't want anyone to read. In that reflection, she no longer saw the ambitious girl who once dreamed of going to university. She saw a woman who was drowning, a woman who desperately needed to be free. And that was it. That was the last straw. The very next morning, she woke up early and began packing. It wasn't the clothes. Those were easy to fold and put away. It wasn't the shoes. She barely cared about them anymore. She was packing hope, piece by fragile piece. The envelope filled with her savings, the lifeline she had painstakingly built. Her phone, her connection to the world she was leaving, and the new one she hoped to find. A few dresses she considered decent, suitable for a new beginning. And then, her WAC result. She didn't know why, but she tucked it into her bag anyway. It was a remnant of a different dream, a different her. Then she cleaned her small room, not for sentimental reasons, but because she wanted to leave no trace of herself behind. No scent, no memory, nothing that tied her to this city, to this life. Her mother watched her, her tired eyes clouded with concern. "Olito, where are you going with all these bags?" she asked, her voice gentle but worried. Olito forced a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "I got a job offer," she lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "A good one, in Abuja." Her mother's eyes widened with a sudden, brilliant hope, a hope so pure it stabbed Olito's chest like a blade. "Abuja? My daughter, God has finally answered our prayers." Prayers. The word hung in the air, heavy with a weight Olito felt in her soul. She was running away, but to her mother, she was running towards a blessing. And maybe, just maybe, they were both right. She swallowed, the lump in her throat feeling as heavy as a stone. For years, her mother had prayed for a miracle, for a way out, for a better life. But Olito knew this wasn't a miracle. She wasn't leaving as an answered prayer. She was running away from herself, from the ghost of who she used to be. She wrapped her arms around her mother, hugging her tightly, trying to memorize the familiar scent of palm oil and kitchen smoke that clung to her clothes. Her mother held her just like she did when Olito was a little girl, back before life's hardships had bent her spirit so sharply. "I'm proud of you," her mother whispered into her ear, and those 4 words nearly shattered her resolve. They were a gift she felt she didn't deserve. She didn't tell her father she was leaving. He was at his workshop, probably bent over a car engine like he always was, sweat beading on his brow under the hot ABA sun. She couldn't face him, couldn't bear to see his proud smile, knowing the truth she was hiding. Instead, she left a small envelope filled with money on the worn wooden table, a final, silent gift to the home that had raised her. She didn't say goodbye to her siblings either. If they cried, if they begged her to stay, she knew her strength would crumble. She wouldn't have the courage to walk out the door. Some escapes are loud, filled with arguments and drama. Some require a grand display of bravery. But hers required absolute silence. With her bags balanced on her shoulders, she walked towards the bus park. The weight of her past felt like invisible chains, tugging at her with every step, trying to pull her back. The air was thick with the usual chaos of the park, shouting drivers, haggling passengers, the smell of dust and exhaust. But then, she saw it. A bus with Abuja displayed on its front. It was tall and glossy, so different from the rusty, battered buses she was used to. A jolt, a mix of pure terror and thrilling excitement, clenched her heart. "This is it," she whispered to herself, the words barely audible. "This is the beginning." The journey north stretched for hours, a long, winding road that seemed to have no end. The bus was a world of its own, filled with dust motes dancing in the sunlight, the constant hum of chatter, and the occasional stop where people rushed out to buy roasted corn or suya from roadside vendors. But Olito barely noticed any of it. Her mind was a battlefield. Doubt was her enemy, launching attacks from every direction. What if Abuja was worse? What if she couldn't escape the whispers and the stares? What if leaving home was a terrible mistake? What if she failed? The questions echoed in her head, relentless and cruel. But then, she forced herself to remember. She remembered the pity in the hotel receptionist's eyes back in ABA. She remembered the hushed, ugly words she'd overhear from men as she walked by. She remembered the little girl who called her auntie with such wide-eyed surprise, as if a woman like her couldn't be just an auntie. She remembered the suffocating feeling that ABA was slowly squeezing the very life out of her. No, there was nothing left for her there. Nothing but a past she had to outrun. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the bus window and watched the world change outside. Villages blurred into farmlands. Farmlands rose into hills, and hills flattened into sprawling cities. By the time the bus finally rolled into the vastness of Abuja, something inside her had shifted. Her heart felt lighter. ABA was behind her. A new life was ahead. Abuja was like stepping onto another planet. It was everything ABA was not. The roads were clean and wide. Streetlights stood in neat rows, and they actually worked, casting a warm, golden glow as dusk fell. The houses were grand, protected by high fences and security gates. The people walked with a quiet confidence, dressed in sharp, professional clothes, and spoke in soft, measured tones. She took a deep breath, and instead of exhaust fumes and market smells, the air was fresh and clean. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation. She felt safe. She found a small, modest hotel, showered away the grime and exhaustion of the journey, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. It was the kind of rest she hadn't experienced in months, maybe even years. The next morning, she began her search. But she wasn't just looking for an apartment. She was looking for a new beginning. A place where her face wasn't connected to whispers and rumors. A place that would force her to evolve, to become someone stronger, someone better. After days of searching, she found it. A luxurious estate with pristine, white-painted houses, perfectly trimmed flower beds lining the clean streets, and an atmosphere of peaceful quiet in the evenings. The rent was high enough to make her stomach flutter with anxiety. But she paid the deposit without flinching. She knew what she was doing. She wasn't just renting a house. She was buying a new identity. In Abuja, Olito began the slow, deliberate process of changing everything about herself. She started with her wardrobe, replacing old clothes with elegant dresses and sophisticated outfits. She changed her hairstyle, opting for a look that was chic and modern. She even changed the way she spoke, learning to slow down, to speak calmly and clearly. She made a conscious effort to listen more than she talked, observing her new environment, learning its rules, its unspoken social codes. She kept to herself at first, a quiet observer on the sidelines. Slowly, carefully, she began to build a new circle of friends. But she was strategic. She sought out the right kind of friends. Women who worked in banks and government offices, women who owned their own boutiques, women who spent their weekends at brunch and yoga classes. To them, She was simply Olido, the quiet, beautiful, and polite newcomer from out of town. No one asked questions about her past. No one whispered her name in secret. No one looked at her with pity in their eyes. She had finally, painstakingly, shed her old skin. Olido wasn't just surviving anymore. For the first time, she was truly living. And in this new life she had built for herself, a life that was clean, bright, and brimming with possibility, a man was waiting. A man she hadn't met yet. A man who was destined to love her beyond reason. A man whose presence in her life would rewrite her destiny completely. A man named Chuka. The first few months in Abuja felt like stepping into a dream Olido didn't he think she was allowed to have. Everything was so different, so clean, so quiet. The mornings were serene, the streets of the estate were spotless, and the neighbors were polite. It all felt almost unreal, so fragile, like a beautiful bubble she was afraid to pop. But she was determined not to break this new life, this new version of herself. She made a quiet promise. Every morning, she would wake up early, brew her tea, and sit on her small balcony, watching the estate slowly come to life. She fell in love with the silence, the absence of judging eyes, the sense of possibility that hung in the air like a sweet perfume. She lived by a simple, powerful rule: become someone new, and never, ever look back. Her neighbors were a world away from the people she grew up with. These were career women, working in banks, law firms, and bustling tech offices. They wore sharp blazers, carried sleek laptops, and their biggest complaints were about traffic jams and endless meetings, not about the constant struggle for clean water or the deafening drone of generators. One neighbor, Amaka, stood out immediately. She was bold, smart, and so incredibly warm. The kind of person whose energy just filled a room. Amaka was the first to break the ice. "Hi neighbor, my name is Amaka. You must be new here." Olido smiled, nervously adjusting the hem of her dress. "Yes, I just moved in." Amaka's grin was infectious. "Good. You're coming with me for brunch this weekend. No arguments." And just like that, it was the start of a friendship Olido desperately needed, even if she didn't know it yet. Through Amaka, her world expanded. She met other women, confident, modern, ambitious women who welcomed her into their circle without asking about her past, without a hint of suspicion, without prying into the life she was so desperate to leave behind. For the first time in years, Olido wasn't the subject of hushed whispers and sideways glances. She was simply a woman, a friend, a normal human being. One sunny afternoon, her phone buzzed. It was Amaka. "Babe, I'm at home. Come and keep me company, Jer. My brother is around too." "Ignore him. He's always forming serious." Olido didn't think much of it. She threw on a casual dress, tied her hair up in a simple knot, and walked the short distance to Amaka's house. She had no idea that destiny had already walked ahead of her, waiting just inside that door. Amaka's house was even larger than she'd imagined. Cream-colored walls, polished tiles that reflected the afternoon light, and neatly trimmed plants lining the walkway. A housekeeper welcomed her in with a polite smile and led her to the living room. There, she found Amaka curled up on a plush couch, completely absorbed in a movie. "Look at you," Amaka teased, her eyes lighting up. "Fine girl. Abuja is already polishing you." They were still laughing, their voices filling the quiet room, when someone walked in from the hallway. A man. He was tall, well-built, with rich, brown skin and the gentlest eyes she had ever seen. He had a calm presence that seemed to fill the room before he even spoke a word. His voice, when it came, was deep and steady. "Amaka, where did you keep my—" He stopped mid-sentence the moment he saw her. Their eyes met, and in that single, silent instant, something shifted. The air, her heartbeat, time itself seemed to slow down. Olido felt it immediately, a warm, quiet pull deep in her chest. A feeling she had never experienced before, not in her wildest years, not with anyone. Amaka, sensing the shift, grinned mischievously. "Olido, meet my elder brother, Chuka. Chuka, meet my friend, Olido." He stepped forward, his movement graceful and unhurried, offering his hand. His palm was warm, his grip firm but gentle. His smile was soft and, most importantly, genuine. "Nice to meet you," he said, his voice as calm as his presence. Olido swallowed, trying to find her own voice, trying to steady the sudden flutter in her chest. And you too. She had met countless men in her past. Rich men, powerful men, handsome men, charming men. But none of them had ever given her this strange, unsettling feeling. None had ever looked at her like she was more than just a pretty face, more than a body, more than a fleeting moment of entertainment. Chuka looked at her like she was a real person. The connection between them was gentle, not overwhelming. He didn't talk too much or try too hard to impress her. He simply joined them in the living room, listening attentively to their conversation. He asked Olido thoughtful questions about her move to Abuja and laughed softly at his sister's jokes. Everything about him was calm, steady, safe, and that feeling of safety, ironically, terrified her. She wasn't used to men like him, men who were patient, respectful, and warm without being overtly flirtatious. But with every quiet glance he sent her way, something inside her, a wall she had built so high, began to soften. Later, when she stood up to leave, he walked her to the door. "Let me take your number," he said, his tone casual, almost offhand. "It will be good to know more friends in the estate." His tone might have been light, but the moment felt heavy with unspoken meaning. It felt like he was asking for something much deeper than just a phone number. For one brief, heart-stopping second, she hesitated. The old Olido would have run. But this was the new Olido. She took his phone and typed in her number. "Thank you for coming," he said, that soft smile returning to his face. Olido just nodded, her heart fluttering in a way it hadn't in years, a way she thought it never would again. As she walked back to her apartment under the evening sky, she knew something profound had just happened. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept replaying the events of the afternoon. His voice, his smile, the quiet confidence in the way he carried himself, like a man who was completely at peace with who he was. She replayed the look in his eyes, that look of genuine interest, of seeing her. This feeling was entirely new. It wasn't the frantic, dangerous excitement she had once mistaken for passion. This was something different. It was quiet, it was deep, and it was undeniably powerful. It was the beginning of something she couldn't yet name, but she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that her life in Abuja was about to change forever. Meeting Chuka wasn't just a coincidence. It felt like coming home to a place she never knew existed. She wasn't used to men like him. She wasn't used to gentleness. She wasn't used to sincerity. Her entire life had been built around survival, not romance. She had never learned what real affection felt like. So why did Chuka's presence feel like a warm blanket wrapping around her heart? Her phone buzzed. A message. "Chuka, hope you got home safely. It was nice meeting you today." She stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "I did. Thank you. Nice meeting you too." She placed her phone on her chest and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she didn't fully understand. Hope, fear, longing, a possibility of love. She had no idea that this gentle beginning would grow into a love so deep it would shake the very foundations of her life and lead her into a future filled with joy, secrets, heartbreak, and a child unlike any other. Chuka didn't call the next day, or the day after that, and for reasons she couldn't quite explain, that tiny silence bothered Olido in a way she hadn't expected. She found herself constantly checking her phone, glancing at random notifications, hoping, just hoping one of them would be from him. It confused her. What was she expecting? They barely knew each other. He had simply been polite, warm, thoughtful, nothing more than that. Still, his absence felt louder than his presence ever did. On the third day, her phone finally rang. His name flashed across the screen. Chuka. Her heart jumped. It literally jumped in her chest. She took a deep breath and answered, trying to sound calm, trying to hide how fast her heart was racing. "Hello. Good afternoon, Olido," his deep, steady voice replied. "I hope I'm not disturbing." A smile she didn't plan crept onto her face. "No, not at all." He exhaled, a soft, relieved sound. "I was wondering," he continued, "would you like to come over for dinner tomorrow? Nothing serious. Just a quiet evening." A quiet evening. Those words tugged at something deep within her chest. She hesitated, but only for a moment, then said softly, "Yes, I'd like that." "Good," he replied. "I'll send the address." As if she didn't already know where he lived. As she ended the call, she placed her phone on her chest and let out a long, shaky breath. Something was beginning, something subtle, something gentle, something dangerously sweet. And she wasn't ready, but she also didn't want to stop it. Chuka lived in one of the estate's biggest houses, not loud or flashy, but elegant. It was the kind of house that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. When she arrived, a housekeeper opened the door, smiling politely. "Madam Olido, please come in." He called her madam. She wasn't used to being treated with that kind of respect. She stepped into the living room and paused, taking it all in. It was beautiful. Pearl white walls, dark wooden floors, tastefully simple furniture. A large, striking painting of a galloping horse hung above a console table. The whole space felt like it was built by a calm, disciplined man. Chuka walked in from the hallway just moments later, wearing black trousers and a soft gray shirt. He looked relaxed, almost at home in his seriousness. "You're here," he said warmly. "I'm glad." There was no tension in his tone, no pretense, just calm sincerity. And that scared her more than any rich man from her past ever did. Dinner was simple but elegant, grilled fish, mashed yams, and a vegetable stir-fry. They ate slowly, talking like they were old friends. He asked about her move to Abuja, her dreams, her interests. She asked about his job, his horses, his hobbies. They were different in almost every imaginable way, yet every moment felt strangely natural. There was no forced flirting, no hunger in his eyes, no hidden motives, just peace. It was something she never knew she needed. After dinner, he stood up with a small smile. "Come, I want to show you something." He led her to the back of the house, where a large, beautifully designed stable stretched across the compound. As they walked in, the earthy scent of hay and polished wood filled her lungs. She stopped, completely stunned. 3 horses, tall, majestic, perfectly groomed. They looked like creatures carved from strength itself. Olito gasped before she could stop herself. You really have horses?" "Yes," he said, smiling softly. "I've always loved them. They're calming, loyal, honest." She moved closer to one of them, a brown stallion with dark, intelligent eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You can touch him," Chuka said. "He's gentle." Her hand trembled as she reached out and touched the stallion's neck. It felt warm, smooth, strong. She felt something strange, a quiet connection, a comfort she couldn't explain. Chuka watched her, an unreadable expression in his eyes. It was a mix of admiration, warmth, and perhaps something even deeper. "Do you want to ride?" he asked. Her heart thudded. "I've never. I'll be beside you." Those 4 words dissolved her fear. Moments later, she found herself seated on the horse, her heartbeat matching the steady rhythm of the animal's breathing. Chuka stood beside her, one hand steadying the reins, the other resting on her back, warm and grounding. "You're doing great," he said softly. His voice, his touch, the gentle sway of the horse beneath her. It was a perfect, peaceful moment. But Olito had no idea that this quiet evening was just the beginning of a story that would unravel everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the secrets that bind people together. Chuka wasn't just a man with horses. He was a man with a past that was about to collide with her future in the most unexpected way. This gentle ride was just the calm before a storm that would change her life forever. After the ride, they sat on a bench near the stable. The evening breeze was gentle, brushing against their skin as the night grew heavy with unspoken things. "You're easy to talk to," Chuka said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Olito's heart tightened in her chest. "You too," she managed to say. He turned to her then, his eyes soft and sincere. "I don't know why, but I feel really comfortable with you. Like I've known you for much longer than just a few days." She swallowed hard, the lump in her throat making it difficult to speak. "I feel that too." The silence that fell between them wasn't awkward. It was warm, filled with a quiet understanding. He didn't try to take her hand. He didn't lean in closer. He didn't rush anything at all. And that, more than anything, made her chest ache in a sweet, almost painful way. It was a feeling she wasn't used to, a feeling that whispered something dangerous into the depths of her soul. This man could break down the walls you've spent a lifetime building. This man could love you in a way that absolutely terrifies you. The ride home was quiet. Neither of them spoke much, but the air inside the car felt thick with a new, undefined emotion. Just before she stepped out, he spoke again, his voice gentle. "Olito, can I see you again?" Her breath caught in her throat. "Yes." A small pause, then he asked, "Soon?" "Yes," she whispered again, the word barely audible. He smiled, a small, sincere smile that reached his eyes and made them sparkle. "Good night." "Good night, Chuka." She stepped out of the car feeling like her feet weren't even touching the ground. That night, sleep was a distant stranger. She lay awake for hours, just staring at her ceiling, feeling something she hadn't felt in a very, very long time. It was a soft, warm, slow-burning kind of affection. A possibility. A beginning. She was torn. She didn't know whether to hold on to this fragile new feeling or to run from it as fast as she could. She had no idea that Chuka would soon fall deeply, dangerously, in love with her. She couldn't have known that her past, a shadow she tried so hard to outrun, would eventually threaten to destroy everything they were building. She couldn't possibly imagine how her future child would reshape both their destinies in ways neither of them could ever foresee. All she knew, in that quiet, solitary moment, was that this night felt like the first page of a new story. A love story, a painful story, a destiny she could not escape. The days after her first dinner at Chuka's house passed like soft waves, gentle, warm, and steady. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was loud. Everything between them unfolded with a peaceful, natural rhythm that scared Olito more than she was willing to admit. Chuka was different from the men she had known. He didn't pressure her. He didn't chase her with that raw, obvious lust. He didn't speak with the kind of hunger she had once learned to use for her own survival. Instead, he simply reached out. Slowly, thoughtfully, consistently. And with each call, each visit, each gentle question, he was carefully tugging at a part of her heart she was convinced had died long ago. His approach was a romance of quiet gestures. Chuka wasn't dramatic. He was intentional. He would send her simple messages during the day. Things like, "Have you eaten today?" Or "Are you resting well?" Sometimes it was just, "I passed by your street. Hope your day is going smoothly." They were simple words, but they warmed her in a way she wasn't used to, like a blanket on a cold night. Some evenings, he'd stop by her apartment after work. He'd smell faintly of engine oil and office air conditioning. And he'd be carrying takeout because he'd noticed she only cooked when she was feeling overwhelmed. Whenever he visited, he didn't walk in like a conqueror claiming his territory. He walked in like a friend, a man who genuinely, truly cared. He'd sit on her sofa, loosen his tie, and just talk to her about his day. He'd tell her about the difficult clients he had to deal with, the progress of the horses he was training, the big projects he was managing at work. And he listened to her, too. He really, truly listened. Even when she talked about the most mundane things, the little garden in front of her house, a new neighbor who played loud music, the random scattered thoughts that filled her day. He listened as if she was telling him the most important story in the world. No man had ever treated her like her voice mattered before. No one had ever made her feel like her thoughts were worth hearing. But the closer he got emotionally, the deeper her fear grew. It was a constant companion, a shadow that stretched longer as the light of their connection grew brighter. At night, when the estate fell quiet and the world was asleep, Olito would lie awake, staring at her ceiling, her mind replaying the years behind her. She'd think about the rooms she had visited, the men she had entertained, the body she had surrendered to, not out of desire, but for survival. She'd hear the whispers, feel the shame, and taste the secret she carried like a slow-acting poison in her veins. And in those dark, lonely hours, a single thought would circle her mind, choking her with its cold grip. If he ever finds out, everything will end. The fear was suffocating. Even the happiness she was starting to feel scared her, because it felt like a happiness she had no right to hold on to. Deep down, in a place she rarely let anyone see, Olito believed one thing with absolute certainty. She didn't deserve a man like Chuka. Not with her past, not with her scars, and certainly not with the name she carried, buried deep beneath a new accent and polished clothes. Every day was a battle between the hope he offered and the history she couldn't erase. Chuka's kindness was a mirror, and in it, she saw not only the woman she could be, but also the woman she had been. And she was terrified that he would one day see it too. His love felt like a beautiful, fragile gift that she was destined to break. She wanted to accept it, to hold it close, but her hands felt too dirty, too unworthy. She started finding excuses to create distance. A missed call here, a vague text there. It was a subtle retreat, a quiet sabotage born from fear. She was protecting him, she told herself. Protecting him from the truth of who she was. Because a man like Chuka, a man who was good and kind and whole, deserved someone who was the same. He deserved a clean slate, a simple love story, not the complicated, messy epic that was her life. But Chuka was persistent, in his gentle way. He didn't demand explanations. He just remained steady. If she missed a call, he'd send a text later, saying, "Thinking of you. Hope you're okay." If she was distant, he'd give her space, but he'd let her know he was still there. His consistency was both a comfort and a torment. It made her want to give in, to trust him, to believe that maybe, just maybe, her past didn't have to define her future. One evening, he showed up unannounced. He had 2 tubs of her favorite ice cream. He just smiled and said, "I had a feeling you might need this." They sat in comfortable silence, eating ice cream straight from the tubs. And in that moment, the fear subsided just a little. Looking at him, so calm and unassuming, she felt a flicker of courage. What if she told him? What if she laid all her broken pieces at his feet and let him decide if they were too sharp to handle? The thought was terrifying, more terrifying than any man she'd ever faced before. But for the first time, it didn't seem impossible. With Chuka, the impossible was starting to feel like a possibility. The question was, did she have the strength to take that leap? To risk losing the best thing that had ever happened to her for the chance at a love that was real and true? She didn't know. All she knew was that she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and Chuka was asking her to fly. And she was more afraid of falling than she had ever been in her life. It happened on a cool evening. They were sitting on a bench near the stable after a short horse ride. The sky was turning a beautiful orange, and the evening breeze brushed softly against their skin. They talked about nothing and everything. Life, their future plans, their dreams. She mentioned, almost shyly, "I've always wanted to learn how to swim." He turned to her, a smile playing on his lips. Then I'll teach you. You? She laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet air. You can swim. He raised a brow, feigning offense. I can. I'm a whole athlete. Don't underrate me. She laughed again, a sound so free and genuine. It was a sound she hadn't made in years. Chuka just stared at her then. Really stared. His eyes softened in a way that made her heart do a little flutter. You look different when you laugh, he said quietly. She swallowed, a nervous feeling bubbling up. Different good or different bad? Beautiful, he whispered. The word fell between them like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through her, shaking everything she thought she knew. He moved a little closer, and she felt her heartbeat stutter in her chest. Olido, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I like you. I don't know when it started, but I like you genuinely. Her breath caught in her throat. Her chest felt tight, full of emotions she couldn't name. She could only whisper his name back. Chuka. He didn't pressure her. He didn't pull her close or rush the moment. He simply raised his hand and touched her cheek gently. The warmth of his palm sent shivers down her spine, a warmth that felt both foreign and deeply comforting. Can I? He asked softly, his eyes asking the question his words couldn't finish. Her lips trembled. Yes. The kiss was not like anything in her past. It wasn't rushed or hungry or rough. It was slow, tender. It was painfully gentle. It was a kiss from a man who didn't seem to want her body, but her heart. And that, more than anything in her past, terrified her. That night, she cried herself to sleep. Not because she was sad, but because something beautiful was starting to grow in a part of her heart she thought was long dead. And beauty, for her, was frightening. She found herself fearing Chuka's love more than she had ever feared poverty. She feared being cared for more than she had ever feared loneliness. Because real affection, she knew, required honesty. And honesty required revealing the parts of herself she wished had never existed. Her past, her scars, the nights she spent just trying to survive, her reputation back in ABA, the men who had touched her, the shame she had buried so deep inside. She hoped no one would ever find it. How could Chuka ever love her if he found out? How could this kind, gentle man look at her the same way if he knew the truth of her life? But the more she tried to pull back emotionally, to build her walls back up, the deeper she fell for him. She just couldn't help it. Chuka's kindness was like a slow-burning fire, gradually warming the coldest parts of her soul. His patience was melting away her fear, piece by piece. His very presence calmed the storms inside her that she could never tame on her own. She found herself longing for his messages, waiting for her phone to light up with his name. She longed for the sound of his voice, for his easy smile, for the way he looked at her, like she was someone precious, someone worthy. It was a feeling she had never, ever felt before. 6 months passed by in a blur. 6 months of this slow, steady, and beautiful love. And then one perfect evening, after they had dinner at his house, he stood up suddenly and turned to face her. Olido froze when she saw his expression. It was a look she had never seen on him before. It was serious, certain, determined. She felt her heartbeat pound in her throat. What is it? She asked, her voice shaky. Chuka walked closer until he was standing only inches away. Olido, he said quietly, his voice firm. I know what I want in my life. And I know who I want. Her breath quickened. Her legs started to tremble. He reached into his pocket, and her entire body went numb with a dawning, terrifying realization. Chuka, no, please don't. She whispered, tears already burning her eyes, begging him to stop what she knew was coming. But he didn't stop. He knelt down on one knee. And in that moment, her heart stopped beating. Olido, I want you to marry me. She broke. A violent shake took over her body. Tears burst from her eyes, hot and uncontrollable. She wanted to scream in no, because in her mind, she didn't deserve him. She wanted to beg him to stand up and choose someone else, someone pure, someone clean, someone who hadn't been touched by the world in the way she had. She opened her mouth, choking on a sob. Chuka, I'm not a good woman. He didn't let her finish. He gently took her trembling hand, slid the ring onto her finger, and whispered words that would change everything. I don't care who you think you are. I know who you are to me. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. But these were not tears of joy. They were tears of pure agony. Because deep inside, a voice she couldn't silence told her that one day, her past would come back. And when it did, it would break this good man's heart. And she had no idea how to stop it. The wedding day arrived with a quiet heaviness, a storm cloud pressing against Olido's chest. Everything was perfect. The sprawling estate was a vision of soft white and blush pink. Flowers spilled from vases, lining the walkways with their delicate fragrance. In the air, the gentle hum of strings wove a melody of anticipation. Guests began to arrive, their faces bright with smiles, their chatter a light, happy sound, completely unaware of the tempest raging silently within the bride's heart. Olido stood before the mirror, taking one last look at her reflection before walking down the aisle. Her gown was a cascade of simple, elegant fabric that flowed like water, accentuating her beauty without demanding attention. Her hair was softly pinned, her makeup light and natural. To anyone looking, she was the picture of calm, poised, serene. But inside her mind, there was only chaos. The weight of the past was suffocating. Memories of ABA flooded her senses. Those nights spent just trying to survive. The secrets she had locked away, buried deep in the earth of her soul. The faces of men whose names still echoed in the quiet corners of her memory. Whispers she couldn't silence. She had truly convinced herself that moving to Abuja was a clean slate, a way to erase everything that had come before. But standing here, on the very edge of a new life, a devastating truth settled upon her. The past had only been buried. It was never truly gone. She closed her eyes, pulling in a shaky breath that did little to calm her racing heart. She whispered to the empty room, to a God she hoped was listening. God, forgive me for everything. Please, just let him love me. Love me in a way I've never been loved before. Her bridesmaids fluttered around her, helping with the final touches, their light laughter a stark contrast to the darkness swirling in her thoughts. They saw a nervous bride, not a haunted woman. They smoothed her veil, their soft whispers and gentle hands a temporary balm on her frayed nerves, easing a tension they couldn't possibly understand. Then, the music began, a soft, lilting tune that seemed to make the very air feel sacred. Olido took her first step down the aisle. Each step felt heavier than the one before it, as if she were walking through thick mud. Her heart wasn't just racing with joy, it was pounding with a primal fear. She saw him then, Chuka, standing at the altar, immaculately dressed in a deep navy blue suit. His eyes were calm, steady, and fixed only on her. A small, reassuring smile tugged at the corner of his lips, a silent promise of safety. Her chest tightened painfully. He didn't know. He didn't know the life she'd led, the things she'd done. He didn't know how deeply flawed, how broken she felt. And yet, he trusted her. He loved her. A wild, desperate urge rose within her, to scream, to run away, to confess everything right there and beg him to leave before he discovered the truth for himself. But she didn't. She kept walking, step by agonizing step, her heart a tangled mess of love and terror. When she finally reached him, he took her hands, his palms warm and grounding against her cold skin. "You look perfect," he whispered, his voice full of a sincere awe that almost broke her. Olido forced a small, fragile smile. I hope I am," she replied, the words barely audible. The priest began the ceremony, his voice a distant hum in the background of her own thoughts. It was time for the vows. Olido recited hers, the words polished and careful, as honest as she dared to be. "I promise to love you, to stand by you, to be your partner in all things, in happiness and in sorrow." She paused, her breath catching in her throat. In the silence of her mind, she finished the vow. "Even though I am broken, even though I am flawed, even though I carry the ghosts of my past with me." But the words remained unspoken. Chuka's vows, in contrast, were simple, raw, and utterly disarming. He looked directly into her eyes, and the world seemed to fall away. "I love you, Olido. Not the past, not the secrets, not the world, just you." His words were not just spoken. They carved themselves into her chest, deep and permanent. Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back began to roll down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him. More than that, she needed to. "You may now kiss the bride." The priest's words brought her back to the moment. Chuka lifted her veil, his gaze soft and searching. Their eyes met, and in that single look, a universe of unspoken emotion passed between them. And then, their lips touched. This was not the hurried, hungry kiss of survival she had once known. This wasn't a transaction. This kiss was slow, soft, and so full of promise it made her ache. It was a promise she felt she didn't deserve, yet a promise she needed more than her next breath. The reception was a dizzying whirl of color, laughter, and vibrant music. Friends and family clinked glasses and toasts, their joyful shouts echoing through the grand hall. Bodies moved on the dance floor, a celebration of the new life they were all witnessing. Olido moved through it all like a ghost at her own wedding. She played the part perfectly. She smiled. She laughed on cue. She posed for photos, her hand in his. But beneath the glittering sequins and the soft satin of her gown, her mind was a relentless whisper. "Be careful. Be so careful. One wrong step, and all of this crumbles into dust." Her heart longed for the life she had only ever dreamed of. Her body longed for the warmth and safety of the man she had just married. And her soul, her tired soul, longed for forgiveness, from the past, from the world, but most of all, from herself. Finally, the last car pulled away. The guests were gone. The grand mansion grew quiet, the silence broken only by the soft hum of the evening breeze and the distant, rhythmic chirping of crickets. It was just the two of them. Olido and Chuka sat together in the vast living room, their hands intertwined, their eyes locked in a silent conversation. This was it, a new beginning, but it felt so fragile, so dangerous, because love, she was beginning to realize, wasn't a shield that would protect her from her past. It was a bright, unforgiving light that would illuminate every dark corner. "I hope I can be enough for you," she whispered, the words heavy with all her unspoken fears as she rested her head on his shoulder. Chuka didn't hesitate. He gently kissed her forehead, a simple, profound gesture. "You are more than enough," he said, his voice firm and certain. "You already are." And there, in the quiet of their first night as husband and wife, the woman who had survived ABA, the woman who had survived herself, allowed a tiny seed of hope to take root. She let herself believe, just for a moment, that she could belong, that she could be loved, that maybe, just maybe, she could truly start over. The first few weeks of married life felt completely surreal. Olido woke up every single morning to the quiet, orderly world of Chuka's grand mansion. Sunlight would stream through these tall, beautiful windows, reflecting softly off the polished floors. Breakfast was always served on fine china, with hot coffee and fresh pastries waiting for her at the table. On the surface, it should have been perfect, absolutely perfect. And yet, there was something missing. The silence in the house was a constant reminder of Chuka's absence. His work completely consumed him. It was early mornings at the office, late evenings tied up in meetings, and frequent trips to visit investors and check on properties. Even when he was home, hours were lost to phone calls and endless paperwork. Olido understood it all. She had seen his ambition right from the very start, and she'd always admired his incredible discipline. But understanding didn't do anything to ease the deep hunger inside her. This hunger wasn't for money, and it wasn't for the luxury that now surrounded her. It wasn't even for attention. It was that old, familiar craving that had never really left her. The craving for touch, for warmth, for closeness. The deep need for affirmation. She had managed to survive her past in ABA with her body intact. But here, in this quiet, sterile mansion, her body and her heart were longing for the kind of love that Chuka's absence just couldn't provide, at least not fast enough. She was living in what felt like a lonely paradise. In the early mornings, she would wander through the mansion alone, her fingers tracing the expensive furniture, the cool walls, the smooth floors, as if she was hoping to find some kind of connection that just wasn't there. Her only sanctuary became the stables. The horses, with their familiar strength and warmth, allowed her to remember what it felt like to be wanted, to be needed, even if it was only by creatures of the earth. But a horse is not a husband, and no matter how soothing their presence was, it never managed to quiet the persistent ache deep inside her. She tried everything to distract herself. She tried reading stacks of books. She tried socializing with the neighbors, putting on a happy face. She tried to bury herself in hobbies and endless chores around the huge house. But absolutely nothing could stop the constant pulse of desire that had been a part of her for so long. A fire that she simply couldn't extinguish. The first night she felt truly alone was a turning point. It was an evening when Chuka returned late from yet another meeting. She had prepared a small, special dinner, hoping they could eat together, maybe connect for a little while. But when he finally arrived, he barely paused. He ate his food quickly, spoke only a few brief words, and then disappeared into his home office to continue working. Olido just sat there at the table, alone, her fork halfway to her mouth, feeling an emptiness she hadn't felt in years. And that's when her mind drifted back. She thought of ABA. She remembered the nights when men had been at her mercy, the raw power she used to wield through their desire for her. She shivered at the memory, a dangerous, intoxicating memory. She didn't want to be that woman again. She wanted to be herself, a wife who loved and was loved in return. But her body, it seemed, had a mind of its own. It whispered for touch. It demanded intimacy. It reminded her of nights where restraint was a luxury she couldn't afford. The days slowly turned into weeks. Chuka remained incredibly busy, and Olido remained patient, or at least she tried to. But the fire inside her was becoming insatiable. At times, she found herself drawn to the stables late at night, long after Chuka had gone to bed. She would ride the horses alone in the dark, the steady rhythm of the ride easing her tension, but only temporarily. It never fully satisfied the ache. At night, she would lie awake in their large bed, tracing the empty contours of the mattress beside her, imagining the touch she so desperately longed for. And slowly, almost without her even realizing it, that desire became a quiet obsession. It was a secret need she tried to bury deep down, a temptation she kept telling herself she would never, ever give in to. But the more she denied it, the stronger it grew. Her heart was completely conflicted. She loved Chuka. She truly did, deeper than she had ever loved anyone in her entire life. But love and desire are not always the same thing. Her body, trained by years of survival, was impatient. Her heart, softened by his gentleness and kindness, was just desperate. She began to fear the consequences of this intense longing. What if it led her to make a terrible mistake? What if it pushed her towards something she could never take back? What if she ended up breaking the one man who trusted her the most? And yet, that primal hunger, the thirst inside her, simply refused to be ignored. She would lie awake in the suffocating darkness, staring at the ceiling, whispering to herself, "I can't. I won't. But I need. I need. I need." The night would stretch on, endlessly. Her body screamed in ways her heart couldn't silence. Her mind spun with memories and fantasies she never wanted to confront. She was trapped between love and lust, between loyalty and hunger. She was trapped between the past she could not erase and the present she could not fully embrace. And in that tension, in that quiet, trembling, aching night, she understood one terrifying truth. Her body had not forgotten ABA, and it would not forgive the quiet life she now craved. Weeks had passed since the wedding, and nothing had changed. If anything, Chuka was busier than ever. Meetings in the morning, conference calls in the afternoon, late-night reports that kept him locked away. Olido tried to adapt. She really tried to bury the old cravings, the restlessness, the hunger that had always defined her body. But some fires, you learn, refused to be extinguished. The night everything broke was a quiet evening. Chuka had come home even later than usual, looking completely exhausted. He went straight to his office to work, barely speaking a word to her. Olido sat alone in the vast living room, staring out at the dark estate. The silence in the house pressed down on her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. She tried to distract herself, picking up a book, endlessly scrolling through her phone, even cleaning the already spotless kitchen. But nothing worked. The ache inside her grew sharper, more demanding. Her body remembered the nights of ABA, the hunger, the touch, the raw craving she had once fed without a hint of shame. And now, even though she truly loved her husband, that same hunger demanded release. It whispered to her, it coaxed her, it begged her. "You are made for this," it seemed to say. "You need it, you cannot hold back." Her hands began to tremble. Her breath quickened. She closed her eyes and an image of the horses in Chuka's stable flashed in her mind. Strong, warm, alive. A dangerous, reckless thought crept into her mind. Just for one moment, just one touch, just one mistake. She told herself it would be harmless, that it would finally end the torment, that nobody would ever know. And that was the exact moment her entire life tipped over the edge. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, her footsteps silent on the cold stone floors. Outside, the night was cool and alive. Moonlight sliced through the darkness, painting silver stripes across the ground, leading her to the stables. Chuka's horses stood quietly in their stalls, their massive forms exuding a peaceful strength. But her eyes were drawn to only one, the brown stallion. He was power and steadiness made real. As she approached, his head lifted, and his eyes, calm and surprisingly intelligent, met hers. The air in the stable grew thick, heavy with unspoken things. She whispered, the words barely a breath, almost to herself. "I need you." And then, she did it. She reached out and touched him. The moment her hand made contact, a jolt, a thrill of warmth and power, surged through her. It was a feeling she hadn't known in years, a raw, electric current that awakened every nerve. A voice in her head screamed at her to stop. She loved Chuka. She would never betray him. She repeated these words like a prayer, a desperate mantra against the rising tide inside her. But the fire, the hunger she had tried to starve for so long, had become a ravenous beast. It was unbearable. There, in the quiet solitude of the stable, the carefully built walls of her resolve crumbled into dust. In a single, irreversible moment, she gave in. When she finally stumbled back to the mansion, the world felt tilted on its axis. Her hands trembled, and her body was still thrumming with the aftershock of the forbidden act. She walked past the study, where the faint glow of a lamp silhouetted Chuka, his head bent over his work, completely oblivious. A wave of nausea hit her. She wanted to burst in, to confess, to shatter the quiet with the ugliness of her secret. But how? How could she even begin to explain that she had betrayed him, not with another man, but with something so bizarre, so utterly impossible. The words wouldn't form. She couldn't speak. She couldn't even move properly. She could only drift to their bedroom and sink onto the bed, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as silent tears began to trace paths down her temples. God, forgive me, she whispered into the darkness. Please, forgive me, forgive me. Her mind was a chaotic storm of shame, fear, and a strange, dizzying disbelief at what she had done. The days that followed were a performance. She played the part of the devoted wife, a role she knew so well. She smiled at Chuka. She prepared his favorite meals. She laughed at his jokes, a hollow sound that echoed in her own ears. But beneath the placid surface, the impossible secret was a leaden weight in her chest. Guilt was a living thing, growing heavier with each passing hour, threatening to burst out and incinerate the life she cherished. She lived in constant fear that it would consume her, destroy everything. And yet, a small, terrifying part of her knew that the night in the stable had started something. Something had begun. She could feel it in her own body. A shift. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. Something strange, something unnatural, was growing within her. The thought alone was enough to send ice through her veins. No, this can't be happening. It's impossible. She would whisper the words to herself in the dead of night. How could this happen? What have I done? Sleep became a luxury she could no longer afford. She spent her nights pacing, a prisoner in her own room, unable to eat, unable to rest. She prayed. She wept. She begged for a miracle, for any divine intervention that could undo the one act that had silently shattered her world. And all the while, oblivious to her prayers, the impossible thing inside her continued to grow. Something no one could have predicted. Something that would defy all logic, all reason. Something that would test the very limits of love, forgiveness, and human understanding. Something that would eventually be born. The months crawled by, each day an eternity of quiet dread. Olito's body changed in ways that baffled and terrified her. Her stomach grew round, her limbs ached with a strange, deep-seated weariness, and her nights were haunted by restless, vivid dreams. Chuka, in his blissful ignorance, was ecstatic when she finally told him she was pregnant. His face lit up with a pure, uncomplicated joy that was like a knife in her heart. He held her close, whispering words of love and hope against her hair. Our child, he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. I cannot wait to meet our baby. Olito managed a smile, a fragile mask over the terror that clawed at her insides. She kissed him, a gentle, mournful kiss, hiding the monstrous truth. She couldn't tell him. She could never confess the impossible secret she carried. Because this child was not entirely his. The pregnancy was a trial. It was difficult in ways no medical book could explain. Doctors were baffled by some of her symptoms, their theories and explanations sounding like nonsense in the face of her reality. Olito's nights became a confusing torment. She dreamed she was running through endless fields, not on 2 legs, but on 4. She felt the exhilarating power of strong, muscular limbs beneath her, a thundering heartbeat in her chest that was not her own. Her body ached, not with the normal pains of pregnancy, but with something more primal, more ancient, something foreign, something wild. Many nights, she cried silently, her hands pressed against her swollen stomach, a prison of her own making. God, what have I done? She'd plead to the silent room. Please, forgive me. Then came the night of the storm. It was as if the world itself was raging in sympathy with her turmoil. Rain lashed against the mansion, wind howled and shook the window panes, and the air was thick with the smell of wet earth and electricity. Chuka, her devoted, loving Chuka, stayed by her side through it all. He held her hand, his touch a brand of guilt on her skin, and whispered words of love and encouragement. You're so strong, he'd say. Our baby is strong. I'm right here with you. Olito wanted to scream. The confession was a physical thing, a ball of fire in her throat, but the words wouldn't come out. Hours bled into one another. The pain was a relentless, surging tide. Sweat drenched her skin, and her breath came in ragged, desperate gasps. And then, the moment arrived. The impossible became reality. As the baby finally emerged, a collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The doctors stared. The nurses froze, their training useless in the face of this. Chuka's eyes went wide, his face a mask of utter, complete disbelief. Because lying there, before them all, was a child unlike any the world had ever seen. A creature of myth, torn from the pages of fantasy and thrust into the harsh, sterile light of a delivery room. A centaur. The child looked at them, its eyes wide and shockingly intelligent. Its upper half, a small, delicate human torso, was perfect, soft, and unmistakably human. But its lower half was that of a horse. For strong, brown legs, like the stallion from the stable, trembled with new life. Absolute, deafening silence filled the room. Chuka's hand, shaking violently, reached toward Olido, his face a maelstrom of confusion, horror, and a question for which there was no conceivable answer. What happened? He whispered, his voice trembling. Olido could no longer hide the truth. She sobbed, her words tumbling out between gasps. Chuka, please. I couldn't control myself. One of your horses, it got me pregnant. She collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face, a torrent of shame and regret. I'm so sorry, please forgive me. I never meant for this to happen. I love you. I love you, please. Chuka just stared, his face a mask of pure horror and disbelief. His hands trembled as he reached out, touching the child, then touching her, as if trying to connect the impossible dots. The silence in the room stretched on, thick and heavy with shock, grief, and a confusion so profound it felt like a physical weight. Olido wept openly, her body shaking uncontrollably with the force of her sorrow and shame. Chuka's mind was a whirlwind. He wanted to scream, to cry, to smash something against the wall, but no sound would come out. His throat was tight, choked with a storm of emotions he couldn't name. How is this possible? He whispered, more to himself than to her. I don't know, Olido sobbed in response. It just happened. I couldn't resist. I didn't mean. I love you. Amidst the chaos of their crumbling world, the Centaur child looked up at them, its eyes wide and innocent. There was no malice in its gaze, no awareness of the turmoil it had caused. There was only life, pure, bewildering, impossible life. And in that single, heart-stopping moment, Olido understood the true magnitude of what she had done. She had survived so much, her past, her own demons, the harsh judgments of the world. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared her for this. For the impossible. For a child that was both a miracle and a curse. For a life that could shatter love, reshape reality, and test the very limits of forgiveness in ways no human heart had ever imagined. Finally, Chuka spoke. His voice was low, heavy with the weight of this new reality. Olido, I need to understand. But we will figure this out. We are still a family somehow. I don't know how, but we will. Relief washed over Olido, and she clung to him, sobbing into his chest. Thank you. I love you. I never wanted to hurt you. Outside, the rain continued to beat against the mansion, a relentless drumming, as if the heavens themselves were mourning and marveling at what had just transpired. The impossible had happened, and nothing in their lives would ever be the same. A new chapter had begun, one of love, guilt, wonder, and the uncharted, terrifying path of raising a child that belonged to both the human world and something wild, untamed, and mythical. The days following the birth were a surreal blur of disbelief, fear, and a strange, creeping wonder. Chuka found he couldn't bring himself to leave the hospital room. His hands still trembled as he watched the child, their child. He watched it breathe, move, and even nuzzle against Olido with a gentle, startling intelligence. Olido, for her part, stayed close, exhausted but ever vigilant, terrified of what the world would say if the truth ever got out. She hadn't left Chuka's side for more than a few minutes since the birth, finding a fragile sense of safety in his presence. The hospital staff was baffled. Nurses avoided making direct eye contact, their professionalism strained by the sight before them. Doctors whispered to one another in corners, their hushed conversations a mix of medical jargon and sheer bewilderment. Was this a matter for science, a miracle, or something else entirely, something beyond their textbooks and training? Yet, in the midst of all the panic and confusion, a small, undeniable truth began to settle in both Chuka and Olido's hearts. This child was alive. This child was theirs. And somehow, they would survive this together. When the hospital finally, cautiously, allowed them to leave, Chuka and Olido returned to their grand mansion. The sprawling estate had never felt so large, so empty. Every hallway, every shadow, every silent room now seemed to carry the weight of their impossible secret. They moved through their home with a newfound caution, their every action focused on the child. They adjusted beds, rearranged furniture, and even considered modifications to the stables, all to accommodate a creature who was part human, part horse. One afternoon, Olido watched as Chuka gently lifted the child. He spoke to it in soft, hushed tones, as if coaxing understanding from a being that seemed to grasp more than any human toddler ever could. You are ours, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. We'll protect you, no matter what. Seeing this, Olido's heart both swelled with love and cracked with sorrow. She had never seen him so tender, so completely devoted. She had never felt a love like this, a love not broken by anger, not dulled by the sting of betrayal, but somehow, impossibly, strengthened by it. And for the first time since the child's birth, she dared to hope. But life, as they were quickly learning, was not gentle with the impossible. The practical challenges were immediate and immense. Feeding the Centaur child was a complex daily puzzle. It needed human food for its upper body and special, carefully prepared fodder for its lower half. It needed space to run, to stretch its powerful equine limbs. And it required a strength to handle that they were still trying to comprehend, as its limbs grew stronger and faster than any human child's. Their carefully constructed privacy began to fray at the edges. Neighbors started to notice odd sounds coming from the estate, the distinct, thundering steps of hooves in the stables late at night, strange, unfamiliar echoes carrying across the yard in the twilight. Whispers began to circulate. Questions were asked. Some neighbors speculated that Chuka, known for his love of horses, had acquired some exotic new animals. Olido became a master of deflection, a vigilant guardian of their secret. She answered questions with a calm she didn't feel, explaining everything away as if the impossible were merely ordinary. "He's a special child," she said one evening to a curious friend who had come to visit, her heart pounding in her chest. "Not like any of us, but so full of life and love." The words felt hollow, even to her. The truth was a burden far heavier than anyone could ever understand. Through it all, Chuka became her anchor. Despite his initial, bone-deep shock, he never wavered in his support. He continued to work long hours to maintain their lifestyle, but he always returned home. He always spent time with the child, and he never, ever let Olido feel that she was facing this alone. He would take the child into the stables, running alongside it, speaking softly, showing a patience and care that was breathtaking to witness. He would laugh when the little centaur stumbled on its gangly legs, or when it tried to run too fast and tumbled into the soft hay. And slowly, moment by moment, Olido felt the suffocating burden of her shame begin to ease, though it never fully disappeared. It was a scar she would carry forever, but for the first time in her life, she truly understood that love could survive the impossible, that it could not only endure, but grow, even in the darkest shadow of betrayal, fear, and the supernatural. Their life was a strange new dance, but they were learning the steps together. As the days turned into weeks, the child learned with astonishing speed. It began to mimic human speech, its voice a curious mix of childish tones and a soft, low whinny. At the same time, its equine half gave it incredible agility. It would gallop across the lawn with the speed of a young colt, then stop on a dime to climb a small obstacle in the garden. It had a surprising gentleness, nuzzling its head against Chuka's cheek, and it would listen to Olido's whispered words with an intensity that felt like it understood the very depths of her soul. Of course, the neighbors started to talk. The whispers traveled over garden fences and through the local market. Some concluded it must be a rare, exotic breed of horse, perhaps imported from some far-off land. Others suspected something far stranger was happening at the grand estate. But Chuka's reputation as a powerful and respected man, combined with his considerable wealth, acted as a shield, protecting them from open judgment and prying questions. Inside their home, however, Chuka and Olido knew the undeniable truth. Their child was not fully human, nor was it fully horse. It was something new, a bridge between two separate worlds, a creation that was at once fragile, wondrous, and utterly terrifying. Olido, despite every maternal instinct screaming in fear and confusion, found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotion. She would laugh at the child's playful antics one moment and cry from overwhelming awe the next, completely amazed at this impossible life she had helped bring into existence. One quiet evening, as the sun began to set, Olido sat on the balcony. The centaur child was galloping freely in the yard below, a picture of untamed energy and grace. Chuka stood beside her, his hand enveloping hers. In that peaceful moment, a profound realization washed over her. This life she was living, here with him, was not like her past in ABA. This was not a life defined by mere survival or haunted by the shadows of shame. This was love, unbroken, unstoppable, and powerful enough to create miracles. Her past had undeniably shaped her, and the mistakes she'd made had haunted her for years. But standing here, together, they had built something far stronger than fear. The centaur child, galloping in the twilight, wasn't just a challenge to be overcome. It was a testament to their journey, a symbol of survival, of love, of forgiveness, and of the impossible becoming reality right before their eyes. Olido leaned into Chuka, her voice a soft whisper against the evening air. "We'll survive this. Somehow together." Chuka turned, pressing his forehead gently to hers, a warm, reassuring smile on his face. "Always together. Always." Above them, The night sky stretched out like an endless canvas, and the stars began to blink, as if in quiet approval. And for the first time in her life, Olito truly believed that even the most impossible, unimaginable things could be loved, nurtured, and raised. The news, as it always does, spread slowly at first. It started as hushed whispers among the neighbors and devolved into rampant gossip among the estate staff. Even distant friends, calling for a casual chat, could sense something unusual, a strange energy emanating from the family. But when an outsider finally caught a clear glimpse of the Centaur child, half human, half horse, a living, breathing being of myth and reality, the world's reaction was explosive. Journalists, scientists, and legions of curious onlookers swarmed the gates of the estate, desperate for a story, a photo, a confirmation. Social media platforms erupted. Hashtags trended worldwide. People from every corner of the globe debated the morality of it all, the scientific implications, and the very boundaries of what was real. Through it all, Chuka remained a mountain of calm. He was a tall man, with broad shoulders and a commanding presence that settled the chaos around him. His deep brown eyes were warm yet piercing, carrying a quiet authority and a deep gentleness all at once. His skin was sun-kissed from years spent outdoors, riding his beloved horses and managing his vast estates. His thick, black hair was always neatly trimmed. But what truly made Chuka extraordinary wasn't his handsome appearance. It was the way he moved, deliberate, grounded, and inherently protective. It was the way he spoke, his voice soft but filled with unwavering confidence. And most of all, it was the way he looked at Olito, as if she was the only person who had ever mattered, regardless of the impossible, world-shattering truth they now faced together. Despite the chaos raging outside their walls, he created a private, sacred world for their family, a bubble of love, trust, and complete understanding. Of course, the arrival of their child didn't erase the woman Olito had been. Her desires, the intense hunger for connection that had once defined her life, did not simply disappear with marriage or motherhood. She still longed for touch, for attention, for the passionate embrace of her husband. And Chuka noticed. He always noticed. But instead of chastising her or ignoring her needs, he approached the situation with incredible thoughtfulness. First, he prioritized communication. He gently encouraged her to speak openly about her desires and her fears, creating a safe space where she could be completely vulnerable without judgment. They rebuilt their intimacy gradually. It started not with raw passion, but with tender touches, soft kisses, and lingering caresses that re-established trust and brought them closer day by day. Even with his demanding schedule, Chuka carved out private hours for just the two of them. Quiet mornings before the world awoke, or late evenings after the day's chaos had settled, where they could reconnect, both physically and emotionally. He took the time to understand her body, learning what brought her pleasure, what made her laugh, what soothed her tension. He never rushed, never made demands, and never, ever compared her to anyone else. He also brought playfulness back into their relationship. Beyond just fulfilling a physical need, he incorporated fun and humor into their intimate moments, making her feel alive, desired, and wanted for who she was, rather than guilty or ashamed of her past. Chuka understood that intimacy was a two-way street. He made sure their time together was a shared experience, leaving them both feeling fulfilled, emotionally and physically. Over time, Olito's old hunger, that restless, primal craving that had once felt like a curse, began to transform. She no longer felt trapped by it. Instead, she felt connected, cherished, and deeply understood. She was experiencing a kind of fulfillment that went far beyond the physical. Together, they discovered that true desire wasn't just about satisfaction. It was about attention, care, and profound emotional intimacy. Chuka's patience and attentiveness made Olito feel safe enough to explore her own needs without an ounce of shame. Their nights became rituals of trust, warmth, and gentle exploration. Their intimacy wasn't hurried or reckless anymore. It was intentional, filled with laughter, deep passion, and mutual respect. And in the warm glow of these shared moments, Olito realized something profound. The hunger she had once feared was not a curse. It was a bridge that had, against all odds, brought her closer to the man who loved her completely. While the public outside struggled to comprehend the existence of their Centaur child, Olito and Chuka were busy building their own understanding within their home. They handled the media storm with care, choosing to educate select journalists, blending the unbelievable truth with necessary discretion. They created new routines that allowed their child to exercise, play, and grow safely within the sanctuary of the estate. They taught their child about love, kindness, and confidence, shielding it from the gossip and fear of the outside world. Through all this, Olito discovered something she had never expected. Chuka's love didn't just satisfy her physically, it anchored her. It calmed her restless spirit. It gave her the strength to look at her past, no matter how impossible or shameful it once seemed, and finally forgive herself. Even as the world continued to react with a mixture of fear, fascination, and disbelief, Olito no longer felt the need to escape. She had a partner who saw beyond her shame, who knew how to nurture her desires responsibly, and who was willing to face the impossible, hand in hand with her. Together, they began to rise. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving, building a family that the world might never fully understand, but one that no force on earth could ever break. Thanks for watching. Kindly like, share with friends, and subscribe for more amazing stories.